And hello again, this is Chris, MTGO's Rec Start, and we're back with another in our continuing series of deck techs, looking at the popular archetypes in the Tribal Apocalypse Player Run event. And this is one of the, we're going to look at Aggro-Control decks today, and I've got a Merfolk deck loaded up. Merfolk probably suffer the most from the fact that Aether Vial has been banned in the Player Run event, although it is not banned in Tribal Legacy Wars by Wizards of the Coast. Legacy Merfolk is a strong option. You usually want to be playing Merfolk if you're expecting control or combo, as aggro control decks are very good against both of those. They put down early pressure, but they have counter magic to either protect what they've put down against a control deck, or to disrupt the opponent if he's a combo deck, and allow your clock from everything you've got on the board to finish him off, because combo would have inevitability. Otherwise, you can't just lay around. You do have to try to finish him off. But it's good against both of those. Traditionally weak against aggro decks, although there are ways you can build it to be better against aggro decks, and given the general metagame of the Tribal Apocalypse event, that's a good thing to keep in mind, because there are going to be a lot of those and you don't want to be crushed by them. In my own little forays into this, I've always had trouble with aggro decks whenever I try to play aggro control. And you can see here that Owain, who finished first place at the end of last year and the beginning of this year, and then sort of dropped off the face of the earth with these Merfolk. I know he was a very big enthusiast of them. He's playing a very budget-friendly build. Whole deck costs about $10, and his Merfolk very creature heavy. He's got 33 creatures in here. Minimal counter magic, mostly I would say to protect against say a board sweeper, so that he could develop his board without having to worry too much about that. Force Spike and Spell Pierce are both fine at that. Because he doesn't have any free counter magic, say Force of Will or Daze, keeping the counter magic to 1 mana will allow you to develop your board. Again, if you had Aether Vial, you could keep Mana Leak or something like that up and still develop your board. But unfortunately, you do not, and so the 1 mana counter spells are at a premium, and that's generally what you want to use if you don't have access to the free ones. A lot of these are standard choices. He's got 8 Lords in here. He's omitting Lord of Atlantis. I'm not entirely sure why, although he does have a ton of 2-drops there, but I would think that seems like a good inclusion, and he is not running the Coral Helm Commanders either. He is running an interesting synergy that I liked. Tideshaper Mystic can make a land and island for 1 turn. Seasinger can steal a guy from your opponent if he controls an island. The opponent does not have to continue to control that island. Once the ability activates, that's all you need to be able to keep the guy, is keep control of Seasinger. The guy does not need to continue to control the island past that turn, so this does work. Again, a very budget-friendly build here that he had success with for the end of last year, first of this year, but again, strangely hasn't done all that well. I would think that part of that is, again, when you start getting a more, with this kind of deck, if you start getting a more aggro-heavy environment, it doesn't have a lot of removal. It can't really, it can steal a couple things here, but that's about all it's got. It's got some bounce here with boomerangs. You might, you're not likely to be able to bounce something and catch it with, say, a Force Spike a turn later, because he's probably going to hit a land drop. So again, it can be a tempo play if he manages to play that way. But again, this is a deck I can see having trouble against fast aggro. Historically, Merfolk does have trouble against decks like Zoo in Legacy. But again, this is a deck that has had success in the event in the past and has been not played very often at all this year, and I would be interested to see if it makes a comeback. Now let's take a look at another aggro-control style deck here. This one being piloted by Ranth. On August 18th of this year in Tribal Apocalypse 85, he came in second. I had the privilege of playing against this in the last round, and since I was on a combo deck, it absolutely demolished me. But I really like what Ranth has done with this deck, in that he has the traditional aggro control elements here, things like Delver that can come down early, even meddling mages and solid pride mages are things you see all the way back to Type 1 in sort of their equivalent fish decks, as they would call them. them that are disruptive. They put early pressure on the opponent, and then you can back that up with counter magic. He's running counter spells and Familiar's Ruse, which does a lot of the little tricks, bringing a creature back to your hand to reset it, that Wizards players are already familiar with, something like Riptide Laboratory. Not limited to just buying back a Snapcaster Mage. There's a lot of things that he can do with that. But while this deck would obviously be good against combo and control, he also is running the full complement of Lightning Bolts and Swords to Plowshares to give him a better chance against, say, a linear aggro deck. So he's biased his deck a little more than it normally would be in that direction. Lightning Bolt, as well as Grim Lavamancer, serve double duty there, help handling the creature aggro decks, as well as giving him reach when he needs to quickly finish off a game against, say, combo or control. And his mana base is probably the weakest part of the deck, in that it's extraordinarily greedy, and I think that it benefits from the fact that there are a lot of people in the event that simply can't afford wastelands given their expense, and a wasteland deck would just wreck this mana. He's got one Stifle to try to protect against it, and that's it. So it is a little bit greedy, but he does have a little bit of something in here to handle everything. It's a very versatile and well-made deck that did very well in the event, and is another example of a less linear approach. You know, not a Lord's, say, Merfolk style approach, but a less linear approach to the Aggro-Control deck. Now I'm going to take a look briefly at one of the bonus decks. This is Illusions. This was played in the Player Run event but did not finish top 4. This was played by Pete John, also known as 1 Million Words, who writes the weekly article called State of the Program for PureMTGO.com. He was invited to play in the event and whipped this together from an old classic deck that he had, apparently. And Pete, I guess, has been around a long time and has a very nice collection. And this is what you could imagine in Illusions or Merfolk deck that was fully powered would probably look like. He's got sort of a complement of aggressive 2-drops here. He's backing them up with free counter magic, Force of Wills, as well as 3 days. He's got Counterspell and Exclude as well. Phantasmal Bear, which is just amazing to think that you have a 2/2 for 1 in blue, which can basically be attacking for 3 like a Wild Nacatl if you've got a Lord of the Unreal down on turn 2. If you copy a Lord of the Unreal with Phantasmal Image, it has hexproof, so it's a very good play, as well as basically giving him Lords 5 through 8 in this deck configuration. I like the use of Aether Figment because it's unblockable and it's going to get power boosts from the Lords, as well as if in the late game you can have it come down as a 3/3 unblockable if you need to, if you have some extra mana around. But this is an example of what a deck of this style might look like, again, if you didn't really have any budget constraints and you could afford to play all this free counter magic, because without the Aether Vials, without the ability to hold up counter magic while you're developing your board, you have to make, if you've ever tried to play this deck without Aether Vial and without something like Force of Will, you're sitting there going, well, do I put this guy down? Do I keep magic up for counter magic? What do I do? And sooner or later it's turn 3 or 4. You've got basically no board because you've been trying to sit there until you could place something and back it up with counter magic. At that point, you're not killing them fast enough. They're getting to their end game. So you have to be able to deploy things and start putting a quick clock on your opponent and still be able to back it up. Even something as simple as if you play Pauper and you have a set of days, they are a little expensive, but they make this style of deck just so much better than they are without it. Now I'm going to take a look at a deck that I played to a top 4 finish. This was in February of this year in Tribal Apocalypse 59, and this is a Faeries list. It is a pretty traditional looking blue-black Faeries list. I was not able at the time to afford a full fetch land, dual land mana base, and so I used more what was actually used in standard with the River of Tears, Secluded Glen, and the Mutavaults here. Because I didn't have fetch lands, I thought Brainstorm might be underwhelming, so I just ran Ancestral Vision instead. The advantage of Faeries, I found, is that it gets around sort of the problem of not having Aether Vial available, because you're able to play your guys at instant speed. and therefore, if you want to, you can keep up mana to try to counter something. If they don't play anything, then instead of playing the Spellstutter Sprite that I was holding in hand, I just developed my board by playing another guy at instant speed, say a Scion of Una, Vendilion Click, something along those lines. Sower of Temptation I thought was very good. I might play an additional one if I ever played this again. It always has good targets in a field where everyone has 20 creatures in their deck. Mistspine Click I was really impressed with. It can get rid of your Bitter Blossom if you're in trouble. Always remember that. You want to usually cast it during the upkeep in case they draw some instant speed removal spell or something during their draw step. Why give them one more chance to do that? Whereas Vendilion Click you're usually trying to play during their draw step. So remember to set stops during their draw step if you do play this deck against somebody. You want to try to get that extra card if you can. And don't forget that you can use it on yourself as well to get rid of a card, but you cannot get rid of a land. But you can cycle away something that's less useful in the late game, such as, say, an Ancestral Vision when I'm 2 turns away from dying if I don't come up with something. So I opted to go with Inquisition of Kozilek in this original build instead of Thoughtseize. I didn't want to lose a bunch of additional life because, again, I'm worried about the aggro matchup. And as you can see here, I'm not really playing any spot removal at all. It's sort of a weakness of the deck. I got away with it here and managed to get 3rd place. But in later versions of the deck that I've built, I am playing 3 Dismembers because I just felt that it improved the matchup against aggro infinitely. Fairy Macabre I was running that week because there was a rush of graveyard-related decks that I was trying to fight off. That sort of thing comes in waves. In retrospect, I think with Spellstutter Sprite, I had some counter magic here. I had some disruption with Inquisition. Of course, that isn't always good depending on what the graveyard deck is, but it is decent against, say, Reanimator. You take the Entomb or whatever. But I think I was probably good enough against those kinds of decks that I didn't have to run Fairy Macabre, and if I were to run it again, I would probably consider Cloud of Faeries or Zephyr Sprite so that I could play that on turn 1 or 2 and be able to Spellstutter Sprite for 2 as early as turn 2. It just developed my board a little better and make the Scion of Unas a little better, again, rather than having a rather clunky non-flash flyer here at the 3 spot. So that is one thing I would probably do if I were to play this deck again. I will look now at the last deck for today's episode, and that is the Miracle Grow deck developed by Alan Comer, which he played to a 9th place finish in Grand Prix Las Vegas in 2001. And as we were talking about Aggro-Control decks having a very good matchup against combo, he developed this deck specifically to beat the Illusions of Grandeur Donate combo decks, which were dominating extended at the time. Now, Alan's deck here plays an astonishingly low land count. He only plays 10, and the reason he can get away with that is that he has Land Grant here. Land Grant can search for a tropical island, and once he's got 1 blue mana, he has a complement of 8 cantrips here that can get him to the 2nd mana should he need it in order to drop one of his aggressive 2-drops here. So that's the idea behind the deck, is to try to get one of these guys down, protect him with counter magic, and also to use that counter magic to disrupt your opponent. The Quirion Dryad is going to grow quickly out of control on account of all the cantrips and the free counter magic, and unfortunately you cannot play Gush in the Legacy format at all anymore, including Legacy Tribal Wars. When I've tried to make a deck like this work for Tribal with, say, Quirion Dryads, you can get pretty close. There are some tricks you can use in deck building that make Dryads actually alright for this kind of deck. The problem is that you cannot, without Gush, an aggro-control deck does not need a lot of card advantage. It only needs to be able to deploy something, and but the problem is it's just not good enough without Gush. Being able to get that instant speed, quick couple of card draw is just too valuable. Also, foil, you can run a couple of these. They're all right with days. That sort of feeds into foil, but it's not really a substitute for Force of Will. If you don't have Force of Wills, this is a very difficult style of deck to play. But there is some design space here. You could look at something like this, again, with Dryads, or perhaps with Humans and Delvers in a really low land count. I think there is a way that you could make this kind of thing work. Winter Orb is certainly smashingly good against control decks. If they tap out for something big, you counter it, and then you lock them under a big Winter Orb. At that point, your little guys are probably going to have the game in hand by the time they get any lands untapped that they can do anything with. So again, this is a historical example of an early aggro-control deck, which ended up having enormous success in the extended format over the early 2000s, as long as the bulk of these free counter magic was legal in the extended format. It was always a presence. So I thank you for joining me again this week, and join me next week for a look at another Tribal Apocalypse archetype.